Podcasters Roundtable, Round 39, your podcast's platform. I don't know if I named that right, but we'll find out. What we're talking about today is, does your website have a home? I hope so. It's not much of a website. Does your podcast have a home, or where does your podcast call home? And we'll answer some questions about that. Meaning, I have a website for my podcast, and it's on WordPress, and I post my episodes there and show notes and my about page. If you want info about my show, you're going to go to my website. And not everybody probably should be using WordPress, right? So we'll dive into that because I know you hear a lot of times in the podcasting community, WordPress is probably the site that you're going to run into most. But again, not exactly right for every podcaster. Nothing is. And our bias on this roundtable will shine through, and that's perfect because we do bias here at the roundtable. I want as biased as it gets, right? And then the whole goal is that everyone watching will take the pieces that they like, that works for their show, back to their show and apply what they like based on what they heard at the roundtable or in the chat room. So if you are watching live, thank you very much. If you're not, of course, this is an audio podcast as well. And go over to podcastersroundtable.com, sign up for the list so you'll be notified when we're going to have one of these live events so that you can come here and maybe attend live, and that would be awesome. But again, if you can't, that's what the archive is for. But today is a perfect example of how important it is to be on that list, because we have one of the roundtablers, a new roundtabler, saw the email announcement, even on very short notice, saw the email announcement, sent an email, said, hey, I have, XYZ experience with this topic. It's exactly what I want to hear from you guys and girls. What would you like to talk about? And of course, come right on. That is how we pick people here for the roundtable. It's based on topic, not when you signed up. So we'll find out when he signed up. It's probably been a long time, but we'll dive into that. So let's meet the roundtable. I think we're ready for that. And we will start off, I guess, on my far left with a new roundtabler. Christopher, welcome to the roundtable.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. And what is your show?
Well, I have a lot of shows. My network is called Trek FM. It's a network devoted to Star Trek and related topics, and we interview authors and actors and writers and directors, creatives, as well as have just group panel discussions on a lot of different areas. And I host or co-host 8 shows on that network. And we have 19 shows altogether. So
yeah, it's awesome. And it's a pretty successful network, I would say, from in terms of, how we define success. But you're doing well, right, with that?
I feel like it, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it, and yet I don't listen to it. So that's a good sign, right? Good old word of mouth. I've heard of Trek. It's Trek.fm?
Trek.fm, yes.
Yeah, and it's very bright there. It is dark outside. Despite my lighting, it's dark here in California. Where are you coming in from?
I'm in Tokyo, and it is 9:36 a.m. on Friday here, so I'm coming to you from the future.
Perfect. Podcasters Roundtable is very Tokyo friendly because 9:30 you're starting your day. Assuming
That's right.
Now, do you run that network full time? Are you taking a time out of your job to do this?
Well, I do other work, but it is pretty much full time, as you can imagine. Keeping 19 shows published. We publish 2 to 4 shows every day, so it takes. It's full time plus another job. So
I actually can't imagine because I have trouble getting one show out. So congrats to you. All right,
thanks.
Co-host Daniel, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com and mypodcastreviews.com. I'm a diehard WordPress fan here.
Awesome. I love it. I like that bias. And it's really good to see that you went through the Ray Ortega webcam lighting class. Your lights look beautiful.
Yeah, I've been inspired, and your blog post really helped. And I realized, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. So
yeah, I do. I love the natural background, right? As opposed to a backdrop. It looks great. So if you are wondering what we're talking about, we got some nice lighting setups going here on the roundtable tonight. So go over to Podcasters Roundtable, check out this archive, and you can see exactly what we're referring to. And if you have any questions, I wrote a post about how we do the lighting for this. So cool thing.
My lighting setup is brought to you by Mother Nature.
Daylight, one of my favorite lighting setups. It's not as easy to work with, but one of my absolute favorites because it usually looks pretty good. Dave, welcome, buddy.
Hey, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, former front page user, graduated to Dreamweaver, now diehard WordPress fan.
Awesome. I think you should maybe roll that back, grab your Dreamweaver, open it up, and show us some, retro. Everything comes back, Dave. So
That's
I'm looking
right.
forward to that website coming back. All right, and on the end, another new Roundtabler. Nicholas, welcome to the Roundtable.
Hey guys, good to be here with you. I am Nicholas Young. I'm the founder and executive producer of the Machine Broadcasting Network, a podcast network out of Chicago. We've been alive for the last year or so. We're cranking out about 6 programs a week. We burn a lot of bandwidth, and I think that's kind of our claim to fame, is just how much bandwidth we burn. Tons and tons and tons of it. Although, I don't know if I could call that a claim to fame because, well, it ends up costing me a lot of money on the CDN, but I kind of gone around the whole spectrum of various ways to distribute podcasts. I've handwritten RSS feeds way back in the day when I started in 2004. I went to WordPress and Blogger for a little while, and now for the network I actually ended up writing a custom platform that handles all of our media distribution, analytics, feed rendering, all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to champion the custom solution over WordPress.
Yeah, you know what? I was surprised when I asked this question. Look at that, my music video lighting there. Look at the little lens flare.
Oh, so fancy.
You just need a fisheye lens now.
I need a fish. That you probably don't want to see. Head distorted. But anyways, yes. So, Nicholas, I hinted at this. You signed up at the Roundtable, saw this announcement, and then said, hey, I do this custom thing, right? So
I did, yeah. And I should stress this at the very beginning. The reason that I went custom was because we had really specific requirements. I don't want to say this and have a lot of people out there go, oh my gosh, I'm not capable of doing that. You don't have to be capable of doing that. If you are, great. But know your limitations and know your requirements, and then be able to use something that helps you find a sweet spot in between them.
yeah, cool. So anyways, appreciate you signing up to the list and getting in touch, and we'll find the right people for this, and we'll find out what Christopher's on, running a whole network on a site which I actually really like, but when it comes to podcasting, in theory could be a little more challenging, but we will dive into that. So let me ask, I guess, first question, Dave, do you need a website? The most obvious question, do you need a website to have a podcast?
Technically, according to Paul Culligan, no.
And I invited Paul. So Paul, if you're watching the archive, it was such short notice he couldn't make it. We're going to have him on a roundtable. So Paul does the podcast report, although he may change that name based on what I heard. But anyways, we'll get him on. I think he's changing his mind on the website thing. He had an exchange with Daniel, which I really love. That was full blown on Daniel's side, and we will have Daniel make some of those points about a website. But so tell me, Dave.
You need a web something because your RSS feed lives in the cloud. That is somewhere up there, so you need that. And when I responded to Paul's that particular episode, I was like, if you're going to direct people back to anything that you want them to grab, be it a PDF, be it a subscribe button, something, it's easy to drive them back to your website as opposed to find me on whatever.blogger.libsyn.whatever.com kind of thing. So to me, it just makes more sense to have your own website.
I would say even, to add to that, a lot of people have a Facebook page now, and this is something I've been noticing with a lot of the people that come into my studio. They have a Facebook page, and they say, visit me at facebook.com/whatever. And maybe they have their podcast at Libsyn, maybe they have it on Blueberry, maybe they have it someplace else, but that Facebook page is kind of their central base of operations, if you will. And I just think that's such a dangerous proposal because one day Facebook is going to cease to make money. Twitter is too. I think every social network is eventually probably headed for that future. And you just need to have a place that's yours, a place that you call home.
Yeah, I always point people to mp3.com, which back in the day was bigger than MySpace, so we're talking a while ago, but it was too big to fail. And a lot of people use that as their only, that was their website. Go to mp3.com/Dave, and when that thing got sued and broken and got crumpled into pieces, all those guys that were making a living selling their music on that website lost, and they had no connection to their audience. Zero.
Well, it depends on the question. Like, do you need a website to have a podcast? technically no. I mean, you can go to anything. I mean, you can even use Podbean or whatever, but let's just say Libsyn. You can now mypodcast.libsyn.com. You can put that in iTunes, and people can even go there to the pages and they can see the pages. So if that's all you want to do,
technically a website at that point, right? I mean, it's a blog, but I mean,
it is. I guess what I mean is have your own domain.
Right. Well, so that's a big difference. I mean, there's a difference. So
that's a difference.
Have
so
we figured out if you
build,
need, right? You have to have an XML file, right? So that's got to live somewhere, as I think Dave is sort of pointing out. So not a website, but you do have to post some text on a page somewhere.
If you just want to have a podcast with friends and just talk, and it's very much a hobby for you, you don't necessarily need to have your own domain. But if you're really wanting to grow your show, not even financially, but just grow your audience, like you want to create something yourself, you really need to have your own domain and your own website. I come from media and publishing. I've worked in media and publishing for 20 years, and I also do branding, marketing. And so from my perspective, absolutely, if you're planning to actually build anything out of it, you really do want to have your own domain and your own central home on the web where you can send people.
Yeah, and then I want to make sure that we make a distinction, which may be confusing. So we're not, in this round, we're not specifically talking about podcast media hosting, right? So not your files, right? We mentioned Libsyn, but with Libsyn, you can host your files there and you can get a blog page, essentially, which you can use as your website. Not what I would choose, but you could. And so there's probably this fine line between where our files are hosted, and just so we're not confusing it, and actually having a website. Daniel, what do we need? So, you're on the side of having a website, obviously. I mentioned it, right? Maybe sum up a little bit, maybe the best couple points you made. I guess Paul, he did a episode where it was, he asked does your podcast need a website? Something like that, right?
Yeah, and I've done something too. I did a series of challenging the podcasting assumptions, and like has already been said, you don't technically have to have a website. But I would say if you want to have a successful podcast, you have to have a website, because you cannot build a good following without a central home for your site. Just like it's very difficult to have a family if you just live on the sidewalk somewhere. You need a home that you can send people to, and that's where they can get your show notes, get your subscription links, where they can send you feedback, where they can get your contact information, all of that. So your single call to action could even be that website by itself. And then the website links to everything else. With your own website, depending on what kind of platform you're using, you can then employ whatever technology that you want on that and whatever features and functionality that go beyond just a podcast and just that audio or video content distribution. So I really think if you want to be successful, if you want to be at all serious about this, you have to have a home where you can point people to that instead of telling them to find you in a phone book somewhere.
Sure, and it's not even a matter of like, I want to make money for my podcast. It's not a matter of going pro in that way. It's just, I need a place where I can put my stuff. And think about it this way. Even if you're just doing a podcast with your friends, do you just want to tell your buddy, hey, go to mypodcastname.libsyn.com, blogspot.com, whatever. It just doesn't sound right. Yeah. Granted, it varies on your level of commitment, but just think about how easy it's going to be to say mypodcast.com.
And not only just a matter of a place to point people, but a place where you have control. You cannot build a brand if you cannot control the factors that go into it. And so having your own platform's not so important, because you could actually take your own domain name and move that to another platform later. If you wanted to, you still have control of everything. That's the key point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So that's this this issue of domain versus platform, right? So I mentioned I'm on WordPress, Daniel's on WordPress, Dave does WordPress, and we'll find out where you guys are building on top of. But yes, you could just have a domain, which is actually probably the most important. And it is helpful that when you start your podcast and you decide what you're going to name it, if you can actually get that domain, it's going to make things a lot easier. I have set up podcasts for people, and the domain is different than the show. And what do people remember? At least they probably know the name of your show, right? So when they think, oh, I'm going to go see more about that, I just want to learn about, I want to see the About page to learn more about the host, which About pages are really popular. They're usually a high trafficked. They usually see a lot of traffic on a website. And so, it is easy to say, mypodcast.com. Who has mypodcast.com, by the way? So someone's squatting on that one for a lot of money probably. But Dave's looking right now. But, it's easy to have your domain name and then move it off to a different platform if you decide. So, in relation to that, Chris or Christopher, is it Chris or Christopher? I mean, it's Christopher, but do you do Chris?
Either's fine. People call me both.
All right. Well, I mean, we don't want to call Daniel Dan, so it's good to know. It's good to know. I already know that.
You can go with Chris right now.
So Chris, I'm on WordPress, but I actually do really like Squarespace. That is where your whole network is built on top of, right?
That's right.
And so why Squarespace?
Well, so my background is that I started building websites in 1995. So I've been building websites for most of the time that the World Wide Web as we know it now has been around, and it's something that, of course, I've done for my job as well over the years. So I can build the website myself by hand if I want. I can write CSS and all this stuff by hand. But what I found, especially as websites became more and more complex, and as the types of things that I'm trying to do changed, because I'm a designer by profession, and that's what I really focus on is content. I reached a point where I said, I want to focus on the content. I don't want to worry about the nuts and bolts underneath and putting everything together. I don't like WordPress. I'm rather anti-WordPress myself, and one thing I don't like about that is that I don't like having to install and maintain plugins and have to worry that this third party updates their plugin and now there's an incompatibility with the WordPress platform, and then you have to wait for that to change, and then it changes, and then this becomes incompatible again.
So this is a good issue, because one thing with WordPress, and I mentioned that Daniel, Dave, we've all worked with people to start podcasts, and WordPress, while it's great, I like it because I just can do literally anything I want. However, because plugins is the main reason of that for me personally, because plugins make it really easy. However, it's not necessarily easy. And quite honestly, I don't even enjoy maintaining a WordPress site. I am under brute force attack all the time.
Yeah.
That seems like I can't solve, even with my host. And, I would do Squarespace. I find it a little limiting if you want to build your feed and different sort of podcast-specific features that I think PowerPress gives us. So which I think a lot of podcasters use WordPress because they hear about it in the podcasting community, but you also have PowerPress, which is extremely powerful.
Which makes sense. I don't use Squarespace's feeds except for in a few specific cases, which I can tell you about as we go along. Now, I did use the feeds originally. These days we use the Libsyn feeds. But bottom line with Squarespace for me is that I also don't like the user interface of WordPress. And with Squarespace, I just find it really easy to work with the content and to present the content. And that's what is key to me. I want to spend less time messing with the site, messing with the platform, and just focus on getting the content out. And also the collaboration is good. I mean, you can do this with WordPress as well, of course, but we have a whole system set up in Squarespace where, I have about 15 or so permanent hosts on the network, and different people set up their show pages for different shows, and we have a review process, and it's very easy to just have this one uniform UI on the backside that we work with.
Yeah. And the problems that I have on WordPress would be taken care of by Squarespace, but it is someone sort of you're building on top of someone else's sort of on their platform.
True.
But so Daniel, my question, and you may have had something to add there, but I'm curious, what does a podcast, what does a podcast website need, from your perspective?
Well, it needs the subscription links, an RSS link, information about the podcast, and the podcast episodes with their show notes. Anything else beyond that is up to you. Certainly more things and other functionalities can be added that would enhance the overall feel and your presence there on that platform. Yeah,
and so we know Rob from Libsyn and Todd from Blueberry, Raw Voice. They have a fun exchange online, and Rob he's at Libsyn, and so he is he believes in their system, and he would have you use their feed, their RSS feed, create your feed and use that to send out to iTunes or wherever you're going to send it. And Todd use PowerPress, build it on WordPress. And the core of that for Todd, and I guess, for Todd is control, right? And so that you are not building on top of anyone else. You have full, domain, should I say, over your domain. And Dave, you've heard these debates back and forth constantly. Where do you fall? Do you use the WordPress feed or the Libsyn feed? I will tell you, I use the Libsyn feed. I use both, to be honest with you. I have more than one show.
I use both. For most everything, I've used PowerPress. A while back, my website was just getting tons of traffic, and it was crashing.
Look at Dave. Big Dave over there.
But things are going but things are going bad, and I'm on a shared host where I had thrown like all these podcasts that I started were all on one hosting plan, and so it wasn't just my website; it was any of my websites that were getting traffic. So I moved it, and as I moved it, I was talking. In this case, it was HostGator. They're like, look, anything you got going on that you don't need, shut down the plugins, shut down this, because my website was just crawling. And then I looked at where my traffic was coming in. I went to my bandwidth report, and the number one thing that was sucking up bandwidth, even though an RSS feed is really, really tiny, it was getting hit, a lot, thousands of times. And so I went and redirected my feed to Libsyn for that one, and it's still there. It's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I usually don't mess with my feed. But so at that point, I moved it to Libsyn, put all my iTunes stuff into Libsyn. So I'm using actually the Libsyn feed for that. And the only possible download is I have to now put all my show notes in my Libsyn blog as well as on my website if I want the show notes to show up on somebody's phone. But that's not a big deal. I just copy and paste. But I was really surprised because it's just, an RSS feed is just a text file. But if you get it hit enough, it will suck up enough bandwidth.
Well, here's the math that's behind that is, yes, you might have a media file that we'll say it's 50 megabytes. And then you have 100 subscribers. So that's 100 people downloading that 150 megabyte file. They download it once. That's all they need. The RSS feed, though, is something that their app will check up to every single hour. So you might have 100 people checking a 256 kilobyte RSS file every single hour, 24 hours a day. So very quickly, your RSS feed and bandwidth demands might even exceed what you are needing for your media hosting. And that's why you were running into that, Dave.
Yeah, and because Libsyn has the ability I can redirect my feed anytime I want without having to ask them. Granted, the worst case scenario would be if Libsyn went away right now. Like right now at 5 till 8, I'd be screwed because I wouldn't be able to redirect my feed. I have absolute confidence that Libsyn is not going to go away, period. And if they did, they would give us plenty of notice to.
And I mean, with that too, if your website host, in all of these scenarios, aside from having like a server in your room, like sitting next to you, right? I guess, or someone can take away your stuff, right? I mean, your website host, technically it's yours. You buy space. They could be gone in the flat of night, right? Too. So. It could happen.
What I'm doing, that I'll confess that I do still use FeedBurner for really this only one and only purpose, and that is to get all of that demand for an RSS feed off of my server onto somewhere else. I don't use any of FeedBurner's features. I just use it just as that go-between for my RSS feed.
Well, and there's still one thing I absolutely love about FeedBurner, and it is that sort of that facade that it puts between, directories and the audience and your show, right? So I can work behind this facade and change things, right? So my website does go down. I'm using PowerPress. I go to FeedBurner, switch my feed to the Libsyn feed, and I'm still going in iTunes. I am not gone to my podcast audience.
Or your website goes down that's creating your feed, and
that's what I'm saying.
FeedBurner still has it cached, though.
Yeah.
FeedBurner won't change your feed unless it actually can see it. So it just keeps it cached until it sees a new version replaced.
Yeah. So there was a couple things.
Keeping them separated for us, that we use the Libsyn feeds for all of our shows, but then we have our website and they're separated. So if our website is unavailable, our shows are still available. But if for some reason Libsyn's not available, people can still listen to the shows and download files through our website as well.
So Gary in the chat room says, how do you get Google traffic without some kind of website? So, we often are asked about how do you grow your show, all right? So it's a website is the one place where Google's going to know that you have a show and what is in that show, depending on how well you write show notes, right? So, definitely could be a benefit to your podcast to have a website just for SEO alone.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Now, Nicholas.
While we're on the topic of feeds, I wanted to explain one thing that we do also that I said earlier that we don't use the Squarespace feeds. We do use them for one purpose, which is that because we have so many shows and we have so many episodes in our back catalog, about 1,500 at this point, it's really hard for people to sometimes find very specific topics. So what we do with Squarespace is that we create collections and we put those in iTunes as separate shows. And for those, because we don't want to count and Libsyn for those feeds, we actually will create collections in Squarespace and submit the Squarespace feeds there, the RSS feeds. And that way we can just curate collections of content based on themes. Like we have all of our commentaries in one. We have all of our, like a special guest, very popular guest, all of theirs. And then we also have a master feed, which contains every single episode of every single show. And that is another case where we do use the Squarespace feed. So we do use a mix.
Yeah. And so I'm seeing several people on Blogger in the chat, and they say, some people say WordPress is just it's too involved for them, so they use Blogger. And again, if you host your media files somewhere else, Libsyn and Blueberry, the two of the best. There might be a couple, one or two others that you might be able to go with. You can ask Dave about that, but they have embeddable players. That's what you're doing, right? Chris, you're using like Libsyn's embeddable player on your Squarespace site,
Actually,
or they have a player?
We use SoundCloud for our embeddable player, which is
so it looks good. You're a design guy, so it looks pretty.
Well, the thing is that Squarespace, they have a built-in player. There's an audio block. You just drop it down, and you put all your podcasting info in there as well if you're syndicating through there, and it works fine. Recently, they added a second design, which they call minimal, even though it's actually more visible than their standard design. But in both cases, I feel anyway that the visual cue to the visitor of where the player is not strong enough. And we have a number of blind listeners, very loyal listeners who are blind. And I know that they use screen readers to visit the site. And they've told me before that they've sometimes had problems. Their screen readers have had problems finding the play button. And so a while back, we switched over and we started using the SoundCloud player on all of our show pages because it is very large. It has a waveform view as well. Has a download button right on it, which other players do too, I know. But I find that it's visually better for the visitor there. So we do put everything in SoundCloud, but we don't actually syndicate through SoundCloud. We don't use it for our feeds or anything like that. It's just another channel for us.
Now, you're going to get a website is another great place. In fact, when I look at my stats, the top 3 places to have my podcast consumed is iTunes, Stitcher, and then my website. So also another great reason to have a website is people are finding you online, discovering you online. Now, with the SoundCloud, you're sort of splitting your stats at that point, right? SoundCloud is then not a big issue. We're just curious.
Multiple places, but I just find the convenience. I've been surprised actually at we do get a number of people that listen through there and they download through there. And I've been surprised at the number of people who still want to download an MP3 file of the show. Well, it seems like something that you would think people would just type the name into an app, but we do have quite a few people that want to just download the file.
Well, I believe Rob Greenlee said recently on the New Media Show, a download's still the number one way people consume a podcast. Now, we're talking like they download it, I'm assuming, to their phone. There is this sort of probably confusion between download and streaming. And I think Max Flight in the chat room, he said, in a world where most content is streamed, do you need a website? There, Dave, can you tell us the difference between someone streaming an episode and actually downloading an episode? This is a tough one because that term gets
Yeah.
used a lot differently, right? With some people, we're streaming right now because we're live streaming.
I'm not talking about downloading like in the app, just saying like in your podcast app.
Sure, but
letting
you're
it
talking about
download. I'm not
downloading to
talking
your
about that.
desktop. It's the same
I'm
thing.
talking about an actual file on your desktop and then drag that into another application.
But it's the same thing because if you download, I download on my app all the time because I'm getting on a plane.
Yeah,
right?
I do that too. Yeah.
So that's a download. Either way, is a download.
But that's not what I'm talking about. Though.
Oh, okay? Well, you're still talking about.
I'm talking
in your stat, it's a download.
Oh, sure. But I'm just talking about that there are still quite a few people who, I think that I think the deal is that podcasts, what is a podcast is hard for some people to wrap their mind around at this point because they're still accustomed to, in the past, having to download a media file. And so I'm talking about people who actually want to go to the site, click a download link, have the file download, and then after they have the file, they'll usually drag it in iTunes and play it from there.
Right. And another good reason to have a website is to have that available, right? You don't want to stop.
Yeah,
you don't want to get in anyone's way from consuming your content, right? Have every possible way that they want to get it. I don't care if people are downloading, off my website, dragging it to the desktop, putting it in iTunes 10 years from now. I'll make that available.
Sorry, Dave. I didn't mean to jump on you there.
Gave time to think. Tough question.
I would, because it's weird, because when you click play on a website, you're streaming it.
Daniel knows too.
Yeah, so technically it's going from your media host to that listener, but through the whole byte range request, it's not sending, like it officially hasn't downloaded the whole thing.
You're
And
streaming
Daniel, you
the
can take it
download.
from me.
That's what
Streaming
you're
the
doing.
download, yeah. Okay, so so with Max Flight, he says, is that what he's asking here? He says, what about a world where content is streamed? Is that what he means? Streaming
I
and download?
think so, because when you look at things like Stitcher and even the podcast app now, I think the default for the podcast app in iOS is not to download your episodes. When you even subscribe to a podcast, it marks it there, but it doesn't start downloading it until you tap play. So I think that's what he's talking about in a world of streamed, where we aren't pre-downloading content because we always have a data connection. Almost.
My podcast app here says stream. Now I get to choose whether to download or stream, but it says stream at the play button. And
what app is that?
This is Pocket Cast. And so when I press that, is it downloading the file to? It's not downloading the file to my phone, but it is caching it some way because I know if I lose my connection, I can listen for a little while, but it's not downloaded to my phone.
Well,
it's a weird
right.
way.
There is the byte range. It might just be marking where it is in the playback in terms of the bytes of the file. And so then when you pick up the stream, it has a way of knowing where to start back, perhaps.
Right. Christopher, sorry to step on you there. I didn't mean to do that. The idea, what you're talking about, Ray, is what we call progressive download. It's not actually technically using the stream. Like Daniel J. said, it is using the byte range header, so it doesn't actually pull the entire file. But the reason that you're able to listen for just a little bit is because Pocket Cast is saying, okay, I know that he's going to continue playing this file. I know that he has this much bandwidth available to him at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to basically pre-pull the next minute or two of that show. Now, when you look down your stats, you're going to see it as a byte range request. It's not going to show as a download. So it is going to do sort of a streaming type access to your server, but it is kind of pulling a little bit ahead of where you are. But I actually know a lot about this because I built an analytics system that deals with this sort of stuff. And
awesome.
It's such a, I don't know, it's an interesting thing. I think the reason that we're able to see people streaming content so much, and the question that Max is asking is, why is that valuable? Well, you owe it to having copious amounts of bandwidth available now on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer. I still feel like we should give it to the people who want the opportunity to download it. I was about to get on a flight this last weekend, and I had to basically download the show at the airport before I got on the plane because I knew they were going to make me put my phone in airplane mode, but I still wanted to listen to the show. And so I think it's about meeting people wherever they are coming from, and more on that in a bit, but I'll turn the floor back to someone else.
Yeah, well, Nicholas, that's perfect. We get someone on here who's, you've coded, back to website, your choice was to create your own, right? So what was the issue? Why did you go out and tell us what you did, what your site is, how it's built, and why you went with that?
Oh, you want the whole description?
But
Okay.
not the whole.
Not the whole thing. This line does this.
Yeah, right.
No, I won't go there. Basically, when we started a year ago, I started looking at podcast hosts like Libsyn, and then I'm pretty familiar with WordPress, and I considered going that route. I even looked at Drupal because I thought Drupal, hey, it's a big, powerful system. It runs whitehouse.gov. Like, surely I could put a podcast on there. And a lot of the things that I ran into were the URLs weren't going to exactly be what I wanted. For instance, I wanted domain dot extension / show name. I want everything to be really, really clear where the shows were. When you went to an episode page or page back through the archive, I wanted it to be domain / show name / page / to. Like, I wanted really specific URLs in such a way that basically anybody, whether they were accessing it through the UI or if they were just doing what some people do for some reason, I don't know, they'll just sit there and plug 1, 2, 3 into the keyboard. Like, I wanted them to be able to get at it. I also wanted to make sure that it was screen reader compatible and that it didn't lock anybody out from our content. Audio content, like you were saying, Christopher, is really important to a lot of people who otherwise can't consume video content. And I think audio content is having just a tremendous renaissance right now. Not that it ever went away, but because people are starting to discover it. And I wanted to give people the maximum surface area upon which to consume what we were making. I also knew there was a possibility that at some point we were going to have to scale out and start building more and more services. And I wanted the freedom to build our feed renderer separately, to build our admin dashboard separately, to build our own analytics system should we need that, and media hosting, and just kind of be able to customize that whole thing. In the end, we actually, well, I guess we should start at the beginning. We started with basically a giant Rails app, which is something that a lot of people are doing now. I know the guys over at Good Stuff and Relay FM also have a shared content management system written in Rails. I started there. It was great. It didn't exactly scale up. And now what we're running is a fully custom CMS, feed rendering, analytics. Everything is written in this little JavaScript runtime called Node.js. It's really, really geeky and really, really techy. I actually just came back from Nashville giving a talk on it down there, and so it's probably way over everyone's head, but the idea is I just needed a way that I could assure myself that regardless of whatever happened, if we needed to change feed URL structure or something like that in the future, that I could do it without thinking about it, without having to email customer support and saying, hey, can you change this for me, and then it not being done for 2 weeks. I think it was really about an extreme level of control. Call me OCD, but it works.
Nicholas, what's your website address for the network?
It's machine.fm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, they're .m guy.
Yeah, we got to unite here.
So you're, Nicholas, you and Chris are both taking the same approach where you have a single network website and all of the podcasts share that same website. They just have sections of that website.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
That's a good. I mean, how do you? When do you decide that a podcast needs its own website, not shared on with others? Right? You guys have networks. Now, they're all. I assume they're all shows that are. Are they all related to each other? What's that decision? Right? Do any of the shows have their own separate website? How does that work?
Chris, you rock that one first.
None of mine have their own separate website because I work in design and branding, and I've worked in magazines actually for a long time. Dave, I think I told you this story when I was on school podcasting, but basically the way I look at my network is that each show is like a chapter in a book or a section in a magazine. So look at a magazine, you have a sports section and you have a lifestyle section and you have a food section. It's sort of like that. So our shows, they're all related, although they all have their specific focus. And therefore, I like to keep the brand cohesive. So we also have a single Twitter handle. We have a single Facebook page. We have a single Facebook community as well. And now if I were to create a show that really had nothing to do with Star Trek or related topics like science or social issues, which I can tie into Star Trek, that's the point at which I would want to spin that out and either give it its own website, make it part of a new network. I would not want to group it in. So like with iTunes, for example, we have our artist page and our big artist section in the iTunes store. And anything that's owned by Trek FM as the owner in your settings for your show will be grouped in, and it'll be pulled into our artist section. So if I did a show about college football, which I'm a big fan of, I wouldn't want to group it with the others because, well, it would get pulled in. If I made the owner Trek FM, it would get pulled into the artist section, and suddenly you've got a football show that's not there. So my thought on it is that if things are related, there's a benefit to keeping the branding cohesive. It makes every show more powerful. We have some shows on our network that have very broad appeal, and we have some shows that are really, really niche. And because our branding is cohesive, those little niche shows get a lot more exposure than they would get if they were on their own.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think I kind of went with a similar approach where I actually had some people early on who were saying, I want to bring my show into your network versus it being a show that we
I get that
created.
too. Yeah.
And my response to them was always, okay, but let's look at how it fits. If you look at the homepage there, it says broadcast to educate, inform, and empower. And basically our core audience is people who want to do something with their life. Maybe they want to start a business. Maybe they want to take their art to the next level, find a way to sell it. Maybe they want to just get fit or get healthy. And so we make programs for people that I call doers, not just the sitters or the contemplators, but the doers. That's kind of what joins all the shows together. And like I said, early on, I had some people who said, well, I want to keep my own website and I want to bring my show into your network. And I said, you know what? That's just not going to fly. What we're going to have to do if you do this is we'll put all the shows on the network. We'll handle the media hosting. We'll handle the distribution. Everything we do is rock solid because it doesn't go down because I'm in charge of sysadmining the whole piece. And the reason I want to do that is not because I'm trying to take anything away from you. I'm not trying to destroy your show branding, but you are moving into a family. And I guarantee you, you do that, and we're going to double your listener base because we've already got this machine, no pun intended, that's moving forward down a track. Yeah. And I need to be guaranteed that should we launch a massive interview on your show and it goes wickedly viral, everything blows up, that your website that's hosted on tiny little Bluehost or HostGator or whatever doesn't just keel over and die. I need to just go to Heroku, crank up my dynos, and not worry about a thing. And that's the biggest thing is I wanted people in this cohesive environment where the branding was cohesive, where the architecture was cohesive. And so if we, as a network, chose to bring a larger guest onto their show, and that's another thing, when you're getting guests, networks have a huge pull in getting guests over just a little show. If I bring a big guest to you, I want to be assured that your site and your feeds, rendering and all that, that it's not going to just, fall over and go to the wayside.
Yeah. And so this is another good, and excuse me for interrupting. We do that here. So feel free to jump in.
It's all good.
It's encouraged. It's encouraged. It's another good point. I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about your podcast platform, that platform that you choose, I think a lot of WordPress users are going to be on a shared hosting. That's like
another reason
$5.
I use Squarespace.
I was going to say, now Squarespace offers you the ability to, to scale whether, your show does go viral or not. I mean, I know Leo in his ads, because he talks for 5 minutes, I know a lot about Squarespace, but in his ads will tell you, go ahead, try to break my blog. And when you send a twit army after your website and it doesn't break, that's good. So a lot of podcasters now. This is a fun topic because we talk about media hosting. I said we're not going to talk about that, but it all ties into if you get viral, in your sleep and you're not able to, it blows up. The episode gets linked by, we call it the Oprah
Which
effect.
Which could easily happen to me in Japan because I'm asleep while everyone in the U.S.
There you go. And, your website and maybe your show, depending on where you are creating your website's feed, I guess, could all break, right? So it's a good thing. Daniel probably wants to say something about that, but
just a
go ahead,
quick
Daniel.
insert here. Before that, I know you guys were talking about WordPress kind of falling over, Dave, and it just hit me that the one thing you'll probably want to look at is when somebody is pulling that feed over and over and over again, make sure that your web server is sending an HTTP, I think it's 304 not modified, which will actually alleviate some of that load.
Does it, though, for clients like iTunes and podcasts? Do they honor that?
In my system, they do.
Okay. Well, it's a matter of how does the client handle it, really? If they see that 304 code, are they actually deciding, oh, okay, nothing's new here, I won't download the file?
In my case, I don't see them pull the whole file. They stop short once they see that
Okay.
header.
That's
In
something
fact,
to look into.
usually iTunes, what they'll do is they'll sit there and they'll do head, 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 and then if they get something that's not 304, then they'll do the download.
Right. We're getting quite techie there, but
Ultra geeky, which is great. Maybe if you could, like, in 3 sentences, talk about what you're talking. I mean, head. What are you saying there? I mean, anyone. What is iTunes doing when it's grabbing your feed, I guess?
So there's a couple of different ways that feed renderers, iTunes, syndicators, all these sort of things, when they go out to retrieve something off of the web or off of your feed, they're going to do a couple of different things. One is going to be your kind of standard GET request. When I go to machine.fm or I go to the podcasterstudio.com, whatever, my browser is going to be doing a 200, or basically, a GET request that I'm going to expect that 200 OK back from, and it's going to give me some data. Well, if you're sitting there and your site doesn't change all day, every other time that I go out to get that, your server, technically speaking, should be sending a 304 not modified rather than a 200 request. And, okay, all right, let's break down the terms. What does that mean? It means that my browser or iTunes or whatever I'm pulling that data source with is going to say, oh, it's 304 not modified. I've already got the data. I don't need to continue requesting it. And so it actually literally stops that request in process. Now, head is just a basically really, really simple way for a client to just not send that GET request at all, but rather just to send a head request and say, is this modified? Is this modified? If it comes back with something that says, hey, this content is modified, then it's going to do the actual GET request. But if you've ever wondered why when you go to a website that you've been to like an hour before in your Chrome and it just pops right up, there you go. It's sitting in your local cache because the last time you went there, it's in a 304 not modified.
And Daniel, we know fairly recently iTunes updated. You have to have some requirements that your host, your media host, or requires you. What are those requirements, and what do they mean?
Well, iTunes didn't update. They finally got around to telling us something that they updated a long time ago. But for your cover art, it needs to be able to support these kinds of HTTP head requests, which are that partial request for the file. Your media hosting needs to support byte range requests, which is reverse what that says. It means that they can request a specific range of bytes of the file. And that's the main technical requirement that they have as far as your hosting is concerned. They don't say anything about what kind of response the head request must give for your RSS feeds. But that would be something really interesting to test to see what servers are honoring that, what are giving what kind of status codes like that. That's not something I've gotten into. I do want to talk more about the network thing before we move on from that too much.
Three guys with a network, and Dave probably Dave has enough shows to probably call it a network.
Start my own here. Well, I'm just laughing because Angela's in the chat room spouting more HTTP/1.1. I'm like, oh, here we go. We're going deeper into the pool now.
This is the geekiest we've ever gotten. So
later.
I guarantee there are people that are enjoying this part.
Well, the way I run my network is the complete opposite of what Chris does. For Noodle Mix Network at noodle.mx, that's the main page, but it's all running off a WordPress multi-site. So I have a single WordPress installation, a single database. It's all running on a single server. It's a powerful virtual private server that I'm now only paying $15 a month for. If you want that information, hit me up later, and I'll give
waiting
you
for the affiliate link. All right,
I'll give you an affiliate link later. But
the show gets some action now.
But the way I'm doing it is I split all of those sites out. I originally had all of the podcasts on one site so that you go to noodle.mx, you see all of the podcasts, you visit any of the episodes, you're still on noodle.mx. I didn't like that because I was realizing that with very varying information focuses for each site, more like what Nicholas is doing, I was defeating, or I was contradicting what I was trying to work on building the branding for each site, because each podcast was countering the effects of the other. So, for example, for my Once Upon a Time podcast, when people go to oncepodcast.com, I want them to only see stuff related and relevant to Once Upon a Time. if they go to the audacitytopodcast.com. I only want them to see stuff about podcasting. If I was doing this all on a single site, yes, I could manage it so that if you're in a particular category, you only see this kind of thing. But then that starts getting really hairy, especially as there might be other things I'd want to do, like open up a store or a forum or search engine optimization, some of that stuff. So I opted instead for running a WordPress multi-site where everything's in that same site. I update a plugin once, it updates on all of the sites, but every site has its own domain, its own design, its own search engine ranking, its own set of plugins that might be unique to it, like I'm running WooCommerce on one site, but none of the other sites, something like that. That way, each site's individual branding is very strong, and also I give the podcast hosts the login to their own site so they can manage their own content. I don't have to publish it for them, which you might have to do if you have this global site and you don't want to worry about them publishing in the wrong place or breaking something else.
Right. Now, in our case, we do have a login system for all of the hosts. They can publish their own stuff. They're kind of jailed into their own show, basically. So that's something kind of complex that I built in. And I guess that works for you, Daniel. It works really well, I think, because a lot of your shows are in different genres as well. There's not necessarily a lot of
not related like ours are, like mine are.
Right.
Chris, your stuff's related. My stuff is, well, loosely related anyway. And we do get a tremendous amount of cross-pollination. That said, I've tried to design each individual show's home on the network site in such a way that it is sort of siloed. But then when you listen to one, it's like, hey, you know what? You might also like this other thing
we
that do, so then you can go and you can dive over into something else.
See, I'll also say, I think, Nicholas, you said earlier the power of the network when you're bringing in guests, right?
Yeah.
And for us, and maybe a difference between what I'm doing, Daniel, and what you're doing is that, so if you had an actor or writer or someone, you wouldn't necessarily tell them, why don't you come on to Noodle Mix Network, right? You would want them for a specific show, like Once Upon a Time, whereas for me, the Trek of Film is the umbrella. So if I'm talking to, Brandon Braga, and I say, we'd love to have you on a show to talk about this topic, it's Trek of Film, and from that point, then we can figure out which of our shows is the best fit for that topic. But people know it by the network more so than the individual show.
Well, in many cases, I'll write someone and I'll say, hey, I'm Nicholas Young. I'm a producer with the Machine Broadcasting Network on this particular show. And so I'll often invite somebody onto a particular show, but at least having the network title, really just, it drives it home. And
I do that too.
We also have this call-in number. We bought 1-844-4-MACHINE so that you can dial in and it goes to the show. So
that's also your license plate number on your car,
yeah,
right?
right.
It should be.
I'm gonna have to cut and paste this section into the network, which we haven't had, which is also a great topic. So I don't want to burn all our network. So let's and because we've got ultra geeky, we want to focus again more on sort of this just simple issue of, what do you do? Where do you build a home for your podcast, and what is that? For the majority of podcasters, they are going to end up on WordPress or Blogger or WordPress.com, right? And some of these can be limited to, hey, you can't place any ads on our site, right? When you decide, hey, I want to do some Google banner ads, I can't do that, right? So, but Max Flight, back to I think the streaming conversation, he says he's thinking that the technology trend points to a world where an actual website becomes increasingly irrelevant to the audience. He says listening in the car, via your smartwatch, I don't know, from online kitchen appliances as you walk by. He says the website associated with your show doesn't seem as important. But, and anyone who wants can address that. But for me, there's just information that I want, right? At some point, I want to know more about the host that they're not telling me maybe in the show, or I want to get in touch. I need an email or a phone number, or I want to go and look at their gear page, right? A lot of people come check out all my gear on my gear page. So there's a lot of things that can kind of go with your podcast that a website can help you build. And this is, well, I guess it could depend on your website. I actually started Blogger. I did a blog spot as well for my first show, Produce Picker Podcast, but I couldn't have more pages. I couldn't have individual pages. Okay, so like everything is sort of on this one thing, and that may be different now, and there may be a way of doing that, but that was one thing that pushed me towards WordPress. I know Dave on his show used to always talk about WordPress, and to be honest with me, And to be honest with you, it was scary to me. Like even some of the stuff he was saying to me, who I consider, okay in the geeky world, I was still like, I just don't really feel like tackling that. And a lot of podcasters are that same way. I think Ryan, in the chat room said it, he finds himself oftentimes just tinkering with the website more than he wants to be, and it's affecting his content creation, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think one trap we fall into as podcast creators and podcast consumers, so people in the chat room who listen to lots of podcasts also may not realize that the general public isn't as familiar with podcasts as we are and as we think they are, but everyone knows what a website is, and everyone knows how to open a browser on their computer and type in the domain name. So while on the surface, I think the idea that the world's moving towards a case where the websites are relevant because people will just get the content, through Stitcher integration in a car or the podcast app on the iPhone or whatever, I don't think that's actually the case in the bigger picture. I think that's how we see it ourselves because that's how we would consume it. But I think that without the website, and I think this is going to be the case for a number of years to come, without the website, you're going to miss the majority of the general public and the potential of reaching them.
Well, and Joseph says in the chat room, he says he gets far more audience via his website than iTunes or anything else. He says, but he has a very niche audience, and that sounds common to podcasting. He says in the early days, only a small percentage even used iTunes, and it's still that way. He says he's by no means a model for the average podcast, but if you're niche, you'll probably find a website crucial. Right.
Yeah.
One thing I do.
Sorry, Daniel.
One thing I do question on that, the website thing, is I have seen that same stat for a while before, that website stats are the highest compared to iTunes and such. But is that an actual completed download, or is that them just pressing play and then immediately stopping? How much have they actually downloaded or streamed of the file? Is it maybe their browser auto-downloaded it? Like there was a problem with IE on one of the embedded players for a while, that IE would auto-download something behind an embedded player. So I'm starting to question the validity of that large number that you see on website downloads, but that depends also on how much filtering is Blueberry and
in this case too, it's not exactly that relevant. We're not talking about where you're getting consumed, right? We are talking about that a little bit, but in terms of a platform for your podcast, if you're just getting some listens, it's valuable.
I'm curious, Daniel. I know, Daniel, like me, you have access to podcasts, to iTunes Site Manager, right? So you can see browse, subscribe, download, stream. Do you see a really large difference between people who are downloading and streaming, or just browsing and streaming versus subscribing and downloading?
You're talking just within iTunes side.
Right, just within iTunes. The iTunes statistics.
I am trying to look right now, but what I see typically is I do see downloads.
I see about
a lot more 25%.
Downloads. Like for every, maybe like 4 downloads for every 1 stream.
Here, I'll give you just some numbers and you can do the percentages. Here's on one day, 1,934 downloads and 408 streams. So it looks like it's a 1-to-5 ratio, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, iTunes streaming interface, just be real, it's kind of rough. It gets the job done, but it's never really worked reliably for me. I usually go to the podcast app if I want to stream something like that.
But I think these statistics that we're seeing, they come from the podcast app as well, because it's going through the iTunes store, I think. Is that true, Daniel?
Interesting.
Right, yeah. What we're seeing and what we're talking about is just from iTunes Store. Maybe the podcast app, though. I think at one time they did say this is also including podcast app.
I think so.
But I'll just say, to the question, is that website still something that you've got to have? And I don't know, I just keep coming back to the basics, which is, if you want a place to put your stuff, is going to be so important, then you're going to need it. And even beyond that, you're going to want a way for people to go to your stuff and use the web player there. Like, Daniel was talking about. Granted that the stats are a little wonky. My web player actually doesn't kick over and log that stream until they've played like half of it. But I think it's so valuable just to give people a place to do that, because what I've found is that we'll have, when we launch a new show, 5 to 10 times the amount of streams that we do downloads. And then people will slowly go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I really like this show. And then they'll go and then they'll actually subscribe and start downloading. And so I think playing back using the web player or using the stream in iTunes, that's a way for people to kind of audition a show and see what they think about it. And I think what we're seeing right now is probably more people than ever who have been doing this sort of auditioning of shows to check it out and see if they like it. Because podcasting and subscribing to a podcast can get a little bit arduous unless you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some people still, I know, that have been listening to us for a solid year, that have been listening to me longer than that, and they're still listening using the web player. They tell me, say, I'll wait for it to come through on your Facebook page, and then I'm going to go click on the play button. And so I think that having an embeddable player on your website is still super important.
And, having your own platform allows you to educate them on how to subscribe to you instead of just saying, find me in iTunes. Right. And they're thinking, what's in iTunes? Yeah. Well, you can send them to your site. People know how to visit a site. You send them there, and on your site, you can say, click this button, download this. You can give instructions like that, or you can have a link that opens the app for them on their phones.
Yeah.
That's the key is you just said it. If you don't have a website, you can't make a pretty link to go to iTunes. So now you have to say, find me in iTunes, and you can't say, join my mail list because, send an email maybe to this email, and maybe it'll sign you up or things like that. But if you've got, it's much easier to put a sign-up form on a website than it is without one.
Yeah, and similar to the the email list issue, which I think is just so important for podcasters. And we're talking about sort of sometimes building on top of third parties or having no sort of home on the web where you just sort of your content lives in these different directories. But if someone turns the plug off, right, to iTunes, if iTunes kicks you out because they decided you violated some terms of service, how then are you going to talk to those listeners, right? You've been cut off, right? And so if you're not in control of that, I think an email list, its main value is that alone, right? It allows me to talk to my subscribers. But a website does that as well. If the website has places for them to subscribe to your email, or it's a hub they can come to when something's gone wrong, they need to go find you. And what's the one thing they probably do remember is either your name or, maybe your website's name, is hopefully your show's name. But they can find you a little easier than having to maybe find you on Facebook where your privacy settings aren't keeping, again, it's about these barriers. I don't want to have barriers in the way of my audience doing anything they want to do with my show.
I'm even putting up a page on our website that says, what is a podcast?
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah, it's a really good page.
It's the first time they've heard of the idea of podcasting. Maybe they're used to having to go to their local radio show and click play on that button.
And I have a question. I have a question on my list here that I want to make sure I get to. And this is just a question that is related to this, but we can answer it however we want. Where do you send people to subscribe to your show?
I send people to iTunes because we have an iTunes.com/TrekFM. So that's really easy for people to just type that into the browser.
A large part of your audience doesn't go anywhere near iTunes.
Yeah. But the other thing is that Trek.fm. So we have two ways. What we tell people actually is if you're an Apple user, type iTunes.com/TrekFM into your browser. It'll take you straight to our artist section. And otherwise, go to Trek.fm. And we have there, like every single show page, we have all the links to all the places that you can get things. And then we usually do a little rundown too, like all the different places. But those are the two key ones right there.
Mm-hmm. You know what you're missing, Chris, by doing it that way is potential iTunes affiliate income. Like I do noodle.mx/iTunes, which results on my full network page, just like you have, or an artist page like someone else might have. But I'm making my own URL, so it's my domain I'm giving them, noodle.mx/iTunes. And then it's using my PHG iTunes affiliate link, so I get the potential to make money from it.
Dave, you have one chance to tell people where to. And this is hypothetical. You have one chance. Only you can use one place. Where do you send people to subscribe to your podcast? What do you tell people?
I would. In theory, we should make a page that says yourwebsite.com/subscribe, where it's like click here to subscribe in Twitter, in Twitter. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Stitcher.
Someday. They have a video player
Yeah.
coming, so
Yeah.
someday.
Yeah. But then they could say, click here for iTunes, click here for Stitcher, click here for
Right.
et cetera, in an RSS feed.
And that would be on your website, right? So, I mean...
And that way I have control over that.
And-
PowerPress 6.0. It's coming.
Right. PowerPress is going to have built-in subscribe page. I mean, we've all been putting subscription buttons probably on our website for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I go out and grab the little iTunes icon, the Stitcher icon, whatever, and those are on the website, right? So at least go to my website. You know, it's got buttons to subscribe there. But I was just curious. You know, it's a good question when you only have, you know, one chance to tell someone where they can go subscribe
One
to your show. I'm
reason that
curious.
we tell people to go, this especially when I'm talking to people who may be guests, that even though I know that people consume through other platforms, not just iTunes, if we're talking to someone in, you know, actors or writers or people like that, they all know iTunes. And because our network branding is so cohesive, that having an actual iTunes.com link is, when we talk to those people, it sort of lends a little bit more to our network strength, I feel, than if we send them directly to our website. Like if we did trek.fm/iTunes, the flip side, so it depends on who we're talking to, but in certain cases I feel like the leveraging our artist section helps us in terms of building content, securing guests and building content.
Yeah, I mean, I send people to just machine.fm/ show name like machine.fm/dispatch or /insider, that sort of thing, and I have a drop down link on there that it works. You know, another thing that just hit me that we haven't really talked about this much, and you may not want to go this deep, Ray, but the idea of having a player that you can embed in Twitter or in Facebook or on Google Plus, like that's something that I started working on about 6 months ago. And we nailed it. Now, when you tweet one of our show links, if you tweet the link to the show, it shows you the latest episode in an embedded Twitter player. If you tweet the latest link to an episode, it'll show you that episode.
So that's something you're going to make available to all of us. So that's one thing that the one reason people use SoundCloud. One of the reasons I have my work on SoundCloud had a lot to do with the native player that I would get in Facebook, which they used to give us and no longer works. I also like the image because it actually, you know, images work really good on our Facebook page, but Facebook in general. But yeah, that native player functionality is nice. Whether, you know, how well does it work? Is, you know, in terms of do people click on a play button and just leave Twitter open? Doesn't matter. It's nice to, again, not get in the way. I don't want to assume how someone's going to consume. I just want to leave the option.
I think it's a good marketing tool. Like, I don't expect anyone to click play on Twitter and actually listen to a 1 hour podcast on Twitter, but it is a great way for people to click and listen to the first 30 seconds and say, oh yeah, this sounds interesting. Let me then go get this somewhere else.
Yeah.
The weird thing is we actually get people who will sit there and listen to the whole hour long.
Really?
Oh, I don't doubt that at all because it happens to me all the time. I get tweeted a YouTube link, and I bet you I'm watching. Sometimes I'll get caught. I saw like this. It's called Star Wars Begins or something. It's like this documentary this guy made. It's amazing. He did one for Raiders Lost Ark.
Watching it, right, or listening?
No, I'm on Twitter. I mean,
Oh, so
it pops up in Twitter.
The Twitter app.
And
Okay,
I actually then no longer can use Twitter because I'm watching a video,
that's the theme,
which actually
right? That's
is
the
good.
theme, yeah. Yeah. Oh,
So-
is that good?
Yeah,
It can happen.
The source code to our embeddable player is actually open source on GitHub, so if people want to go and trawl it, it's under the Machine FM repository or organization up there. This is an idea, though, that I've been thinking about kind of extracting out a little bit further and building maybe some sort of a hosted player service for people who just want to pop their MP3 links into it and have it, you know, automatically spit out the goodness. The biggest kicker is understanding how open graph tags work, that sort of thing. Because you've got to be able to put some tags in your header to make Twitter or Facebook or whatever platform that you're sharing into aware of what you're doing. Facebook is still kind of a rocky road, if you will. They've whitelisted SoundCloud. They haven't whitelisted anybody else just yet. I'm kind of banging on the door.
Libsyn just got their player in. So.
Okay, so yeah, Twitter is an easy like application process. The only restriction you have to worry about with them is you need to run SSL across your entire website and for your media host, which I don't know if most people can satisfy, but it's a good thing to look at.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up here, anyone have anything left on the table in terms of your podcast platform? We've obviously diverted. That's the whole fun of this roundtable is we start off one place and we go wherever the heck it takes us. Okay, so.
Well, I think all these components are related to what platform you choose. Everything that we've talked about today ties in some way.
Way to tie it in. Good job.
Because like with Squarespace, you could host your media with them technically if you wanted to, although these days they have a limit in file size. I've been using Squarespace for about 8 years for many different websites, and even before I started podcasting, so I didn't choose it for podcasting. I was already using the platform. And back in the day, you could just put whatever media you wanted up there. But now I think it's like a 20 megabyte limit. So unless you've got like a 30-minute show, you're probably not going to do it. But I don't do that because I want to have control of the file. If I need to replace the file, I want to be able to go in Libsyn and my Dropbox and just replace the file. So, media hosting does play into...
Right. And so I have to ask a really, since I've got some intense geekery on this panel, very curious. So when I decide to leave WordPress and go to Squarespace, how is that done? So anyone who's listening to this and they are thinking, okay, well, I've been on Blogger and WordPress will allow me to do some more things. How do you not lose everything you sort of built, right? Which is Google Juice and permalinks, out there living somewhere else. And sure. Is it possible to not really lose any authority by changing your podcast platform?
Absolutely. In fact, that's something that I actually just dealt with recently. So here's the goods. A couple of things that you're going to want to think about on the terms of the actual website that you're showing off to people. One, you want to make sure that all of the pages that you have created at those paths on your website are available on your new system. In fact, I would go ahead and create what is basically a clone of your website, page for page, as much as you can on the new platform before you ever switch anything over. Make sure that you're actually consistent with your domain. If you are redirecting right now non-www requests to the www subdomain, do that. I personally like to redirect everybody to what they call the bare domain, where it's no subdomain at the beginning. If you have www, redirect them to that clean domain. But make sure that whatever your redirects at your domain level are fine. Also make sure that if a page goes away in this transition, make sure that you send them an actual 404, not just some random 500 error. Squarespace, I think, is probably going to enforce this from the beginning. The big kicker is moving your feed. Moving your website is easy by comparison. Moving your feed, there's two things you want to do. You want to make sure that the old URL that you have to your feed, assuming that you're not using FeedBurner, and you can just switch the source, make sure that the old feed URL 301 redirects to your new feed. That is a permanent redirect. It says, basically send any traffic that was supposed to go here, now send it over here. Google, iTunes, most of the clients out there will obey that redirect. The other thing you're going to want to do, though, before you do that redirect is to actually switch out your feed URL. There's a little tag. It is documented. It says iTunes new feed URL.
Right.
Put that in there about, 4 or 5 weeks before you do the migration so that iTunes can go ahead and mostly start pulling content from the new feed.
Yeah.
Do pre-populate, though, before you put that feed URL tag in there, because the moment that iTunes or the podcast app sees it, it's going to switch off. But that 301 redirect that you're going to do at the end, that's basically your security net, if you will.
Yeah, iTunes could pick that up in just a couple of hours, in fact.
Yeah, so
put that in.
Is that pretty comprehensive?
Yeah, that whole moving your feed thing is something that we deal a lot with when people want to move off of FeedBurner, right? Because people who have concerns about FeedBurner. Daniel, that was the breath of Daniel J. Lewis that we heard, because when you talked about this, he's, Daniel, we're going to say something there. Is it just me are you guys seeing me clear, or I'd say a lot of max headroom here where things are
I see you clearly most of the time.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So Daniel, was there something you wanted to add right there to that one part?
I would say that actually moving your feed is much easier than moving your website, because moving your feed could be as simple as putting that 301 redirect in place. And you can do the 301 redirect without the iTunes new feed URL thing, and it would still have the same effect eventually.
Oh, interesting. I just did that as a security thing.
Yeah, it does certainly speed up the process if you do a 301 redirect and you do the iTunes new feed URL on that new feed URL.
I will tell you, on Squarespace, let's just say you were on Squarespace and you wanted to change your feed, or you wanted to move your feed off. In the syndication settings, another good thing about Squarespace is that you can have multiple journals or think of like blogs on WordPress. So instead of having like a WordPress multi-site, you could have different, well, I guess that's not true because you can have different domains, but you can have different journals. One can have syndication settings. So you could run 50 shows through the same Squarespace site and have a unique feed for every single show going into iTunes, wherever you put it. But if you want to change your feed, there are two things. The iTunes tag that Nicholas is talking about that tells iTunes to change your feed URL, there's just a field in the syndication, and you just put your new URL in. Next time iTunes hits your feed, it's going to see the new URL, and it goes over and just starts pulling. So from iTunes' perspective, it changes its information. So it will no longer look there anymore. It'll go to the new one. But you can also set up an alternate feed, and you can toggle that on and off. So you could decide, well, I'm going to feed from here moving forward or for the next period of time, and you just put that new feed URL in there as well as an alternate feed.
So, Christopher, I hope that Squarespace is one of your sponsors. You got
They
them
were
on board
for a long time.
They were for a long time.
It's not why I promote them
No, I
even
know.
now, though, because I've used them for many years prior. And
Don't get me
it's
wrong.
just-
I like them. I don't use
good
them, and I
platform.
would be happy to have them as a sponsor. So come on over to Podcasters Roundtable, where you're getting plenty of pay, and I'm sure some people are checking it out. But yeah, let's wrap up. That was good. The good news there: if you decide that your podcast platform is not where you want to be, you can move it. It sounds like you can do that without hurting yourself too much or your show. And obviously, we can get in touch with Nicholas and dive into the geekery of that process. But good news there. But let's work our way out of here. As we go, just quickly tell us where we can find your show if you haven't figured it out by now. But we want to get those plugs in, and I just want to thank everyone in the chat. The chat was cool. Lots of extra geek stuff added there. Some we got Angelo Mandato from Blueberry in there, and he's adding to this whole head get 301 byte range conversation. So that's fun. And you'll want to go to podcastersroundtable.com and get the link for this event page if you don't have it already, because the chat is something really fun to browse through because you'll see all the additional information that everyone added to this round or any round we've had. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat room. So again, thanks again to the chat. I see Steve Lee, Joseph Polk, who we heard from. Who else is hitting? Max Flight, we heard from him. Daniel always does good of chatting while hosting. That's always cool. Ryan Parker. We heard from most of these people. Dan Kramer, Stephen Grasso. So awesome group there tonight. So again, let's just thank you and find out where everyone can find more of your content. Christopher, thanks again for being a new roundtabler and joining us here from Tokyo, which is amazing.
Absolutely. So if you want to find me, again, my network is called Trek FM. That's trek.fm is the URL.com/TrekFM if you're an Apple user. And my shows on the network are The Ready Room, Hyper Channel, The Orb, which is about Deep Space Nine, Literary Trek, Star Trek Books and Comics, Warp 5 about Enterprise, Continuing Mission, Fan Films and Games. And then I also co-host the official podcast of Star Trek Axanar, which is an independent Star Trek film starring Richard Hatch, Tony Todd, J.G. Hertzler, and Gary Graham, and many people that you know from Star Trek Battlestar Galactica. And I co-host that with the creator of that film. And you can find all of that at trek.fm. And then I'm on Twitter. My username is C. Brian Jones, the letter C, and Brian with a Y. And Trek FM is the username for the network on Twitter.
Awesome. So
thanks for having me, Ray.
Yeah, my pleasure. And so many shows he has to read off a list. That's when you know you. That's when you know you have a lot of shows.
Remember what they are. Yeah.
And he's been to the DJL School of Promotion. So very good job at getting it all in there. Remember, you have one chance to tell people where to go, but it's cool. I like it. That is the big thanks that I'd like to give for taking the time to come on to the show and spend what is now almost an hour and a half with us. So I appreciate it, and certainly, hopefully, someone found a new podcast right there they can go listen to. So, Daniel, thanks for coming back as always.
Yeah, I'm Daniel J. Lewis. Check out the podcast that teaches you how to launch and improve your podcast at theaudacitytopodcast.com and on Twitter at theramennoodle.
Awesome. And not an easy task to do, but we kind of made Dave be quiet tonight. He,
That's because we didn't mention Adello.
Oh,
That's right. That's where
and
Hey.
this round sort of sparked by Odella. You guys, if you want to, Dave, some
They're
good stuff.
suing me.
Are you serious?
Really?
They've threatened legal action. Yeah, I had to change the name of my video.
Oh my
That's a whole
gosh.
other episode. Yeah, they went.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
they
was
went.
last week's episode.
So let me tell you
Yeah.
something here. This is another plug for going to Podcaster Roundtable, signing up, getting on the list, and then getting on the Roundtable. Because I guarantee you, when I turn this off, we're going to talk a lot about that, and we're going to get all the insight. So what you miss on the Roundtable, or what's really cool when you're on a Roundtable, is the after show, and that's just when you shut it off. It stops streaming live, but we're still in this sort of connection, and we can talk to each other. And sometimes it can go a half hour, an extra hour, and sometimes you get privileged to information that you wouldn't have heard publicly. Now it's like, why don't you just keep that on? Well, at some point we have to stop. So anyways, you want to be into that because we have another fun geek out session privately, I guess you could say. And half the time it's like, man, I wish we were still rolling on this thing. But anyways, Dave, that's crazy news. We're going to get you to talk more in the non-live streams section. And wow, crazy news. But Odello, I mean, Daniel did a stellar episode, a review of that. Go check out that at the Audacity to Podcast. I listened to that last night. So some interesting stuff going on there. But we did not even approach that subject, which is good. That means we have plenty of stuff to talk to. But Dave, once again, thanks for coming back as always.
Yes, find me at schoolofpodcasting.com.
For now, until he has no money to pay for his podcast platform.
Now they're being nice, but they've hinted you need to do this or we're going to release the hounds.
You know, here's the thing. They have to send a legal letter.
Right.
So you're not. That doesn't mean you're in big trouble. It's just
No.
there are certain obligations companies have for stuff like that.
Round 38, last round, podcasting and the law. Wow,
Yeah.
we were just 1 week too short, but we might have to bring Gordon back in. But I think that kind of relates. Go check out Round 38, podcasting and law, and you might get some idea about they have to sort of defend things, whatever. Dave, schoolofpodcasting.com for now. We'll see you at Podcasters Roundtable because we're not being sued yet. Maybe that's our goal. We need to say stuff that'll get us threat letters. We are not doing it right. I need letters. Okay. No, I don't need letters. Don't send me letters. All right, Nicholas, new Roundtable, awesome information tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, first thing I want to say is that Dave's opinion of Odello means that we probably all think about the same thing. Not to get anyone sued or in trouble, but we're all thinking it. You can find all of my shows at machine.fm. That's the Machine Broadcasting Network, the network I started just over a year ago. Personally, I host or co-host Dispatch. It is a talk show at the intersection of art, culture, and commerce. It's for artists and creative people who want to learn how to get around that evil B word, the business word. So if you want to find a way to monetize your art or your work, listen to Dispatch, machine.fm/dispatch. And then the other show I host is what I call the antithesis to the 15-minute radio interview. It is Inside the Machine. I have a single artist or band in the studio, and I spend sometimes up to 2 hours going through their career from the very beginning all the way through the present day. That's at machine.fm/inside. And yeah, go over there and check out some shows. There's other shows on there that I don't host, but we have just tons of great content over there.
That's killer. I'm going to check out Dispatch. Just last night, I was lying in bed hatching an idea for a show that talks about the sort of making money as a creative. I am a creative. I tell people all the time, I'm not good at business. I don't enjoy it. Nothing about it, right? So you usually get more out of me than you might get from a business person, right? So as I'm a creative, and I'm a people person. So that's an interesting show, and now I don't have to create it. Awesome. I guess I'm going to listen to because I'm not going to. I have no business creating another show. We all know that. Go to podcastersroundtable.com, check out this show, and get on the list. And that's it. We will see you next time. Until then, wave everybody.